Our nation is under attack. I don't think saying that comes as a surprise to any of you. This administration was elected because citizens saw how entrenched we were in corruption. The deep state bureaucracy of unelected officials is entrenched in every institution, to include the military. Today, I'm talking to Brigadier General recently retired Chris Sage, and what he has to share should anger you and wake you up to how walled off and disconnected from due process and justice our military really is. Stay tuned. They know nothing about cause and effect.
We have a gentleman who was running our elections who literally came from a dictatorial South American communist country.
Stealing, trafficking, we've got to put a stop to it. General Sage, welcome to the show. How are you today, sir?
Sam, doing great. Thanks for having me on. It's great to finally make your podcast. It's an honor.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you're here. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. And I will say this very quickly, it's very fitting that you're on today because, and I was telling you about this before, but if you guys hear rumbling in the background, that is the Air Force that are doing something over my house, and they're going nuts this morning. So it's fitting we have an Air Force general and a pilot on this morning to talk about some stuff. Sir, tell us who you are.
Sam, I'm a career fighter pilot from the United States Air Force. I grew up in a military family in Hampton Roads, Virginia, in an enlisted family. I kind of went the officer path, went on to pilot training, and I've been working and flying in the trenches ever since. 31 and a half years later, I just retired on January 1st, and we'll get into that a little bit. Blessed with a wonderful family. My wife is a veteran of 6 years. We've been married for almost 30 years. We have 5 kiddos who are all doing great. And just happy to be able to tell this story and frankly, elevate it up to a level so that the American people know what's going on, because it's not about me. I mean, I'm retired. It's now about those tens of thousands of warfighters that continue to ask questions, that continue to be persecuted, frankly.
Amen. And I concur with that because I think people who have followed me long enough know what I do and my intent on this, but I want people to understand this is what we do and what we say and what we talk about is not an effort to make the service components look bad or anything else. These are organizations that we love dearly, me from the Army, you from the Air Force, and
Amen.
we want to see them protected and restored to serving their purpose and their function, which is defending the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And we have some real issues in our branches right now. And what I've been talking about for quite a long time, and I think what you're going to highlight on and illuminate in your own sphere and your vantage point as a general officer, will be shocking to some people and probably less shocking to anybody who's followed me for a minute. But with that said, what happened to you and why are you retiring now? I mean, there's been several articles I read. You were up for a second star. You were supposed to be a major general under the Biden administration, and some stuff happened. What happened there?
Exactly. Well, like I mentioned before, I've volunteered like you and many others to deploy when our nation calls. So even as a brand new general officer, when I saw an opportunity, I volunteered to go back down range, which I did. I went to the Middle East, to our base in Jordan, back from 2021 to 2022, one of our leading combat wings in the AOR. We were taking the fight to ISIS. We were taking the fight to the other malign elements in the region. We were training up our allies in the region, the Jordanians, the Egyptians. I spent a lot of time in Israel helping them enter CENTCOM. And oh, by the way, it was at the height of the COVID epidemic. It had peaked in the US and had already started coming back down, but it had just peaked in the Middle East when I got there. So I made a decision along with my command chief, who I hired out of SOF, by the way. My last 2 command chiefs were both SOF guys. I hired him, and we got together, obviously, before we put boots on the ground. We were attached at the hip, and we basically decided, hey, we're gonna make every decision over the next year based on 3 criteria. We're gonna take the fight to the enemy, and we're gonna destroy them. We're gonna do what's best for our warfighters, and we're gonna use common sense. Well, about halfway through my deployment, I was told, by the way, also had forces that had gone forward, our rescue forces, to support the Afghan withdrawal. So it was a
Mm.
very busy time, a very kinetic time for our wing. So I find out halfway through the deployment that a high-ranking officer has lodged 7 allegations against me, dealing with fraud, waste, and abuse in a hostile work environment. All 7 of those allegations, but also under the backdrop, about in front of the backdrop of COVID, all 7 of those allegations were thrown out by the IG for no evidence. But then a rogue investigator from the Pentagon, a civilian who, doesn't have the first clue what it's like to be on the front lines in combat, then was given the liberty, or given the I guess the breath, if you will, the freedom then to reinvestigate me, because a very small handful of disgruntled employees said a few things, not about me personally, nothing I did to them, but about my leadership decisions that they literally just disagreed with. And I'll get into a couple of those, but that's how this started. IG investigations are supposed to be quick, and then they're given to the command chain to deal with. And I think we have to, protect that system. I think we need to reform that system, and I'll explain
Agreed.
why
Yes.
here over the next couple of minutes. However, in this case, what was supposed to be a quick review went on for 11 months. So we were all redeployed. Nothing was fixed. Nothing was remedied. And then when it was given to my command chain, it was such a joke that they basically threw the entire case out and said that they disagreed. They took no action against me because it just made no sense, especially in the backdrop of COVID. And I'll get into why COVID is such a big deal here as we talk about how this played out. But my command chain threw it out, and they told me, "Hey, just keep doing great work, keep moving on." And then I found out a year after that, my promotion had been frozen this entire time. So I found out a year later, so almost 2 years after the investigation started, that actually over 2 years, the Biden administration was then going to move, or they did move, to strip me off of the 2-star list where my name was still on at the time. So
When were you
that's a quick
selected for two
synopsis.
star?
Say again.
When were you selected for 2-star?
I was selected for 2-star in October of 2021. So during my
Okay.
deployment, based on the my career up to that point, and I was very fortunate, very blessed to make the cut. And and then basically, as soon as the investigation happened, they froze my promotion, which that's understandable. That sort of makes sense. But then it drug on. The law requires the Secretary of the Air Force to notify me within 6 months if you're not going to be promoted. In my case, we heard nothing for almost 2 years, which is a clear violation of the statute that governs promotions.
Mm. What is that statute? What does that say? You
It basically says that there's very little in an administrative investigation or administrative actions. People like Brad Gary, my good friend, and others that have gone through these administrative actions, there is very little to no due process. By the way, they don't give
yeah.
you an attorney. They tell you, as a 1-star general, I could have went and they told me to call the captain, that, the captain, young, brand new JAG that's on the wall, if I want some help. So I had to go out and find my own defense attorney, which I did. I found a fantastic lieutenant colonel that was absolutely amazing until he retired. But the other thing they tell you throughout the whole process, you appeal, they don't answer. My lawyer wrote, my military attorney wrote numerous letters to the secretary, to the IG. They just ignore you. They don't even respond to your attorney. Then when you push them and say, "Hey, what about this? Can we get that piece of information? Can we get that document?" They tell you, if you want that information, you can FOIA it, or you can take your case to the Board of Corrections for military records, which I eventually did. We'll talk about that. So there is absolutely no due process. So in the law, in the statute, a small attempt to make sure that you're not abused says that if you're being held up for promotion, the senior leadership, in this case, the Secretary of the Air Force, has to notify you with, every 6 months why you're being delayed. In my case, we didn't hear squat for almost 2 years.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you said that because having somebody like you on, I say it all the time. There's very little to no due process in the military. You have organizations that are either abiding by regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice and doing the right thing, or you have organizations that have been essentially co-opted by agendas and ideologies where fiefdoms are allowed to run out of control. And if you happen to be in one of those elements, your chance for due process and your chance for getting any kind of justice is little to none. The agenda is going to control and dictate what happens to you. I've talked to so many service members, and I've had to take their stories public and shine a spotlight on them to get any kind of justice. And when the branch when a higher echelon sees that stuff and they realize this is public, this is in the public domain, now we have to address this, then they get some sort of recourse where somebody will take a look at it and pull them out of that little fiefdom and bubble that they're trapped in that they can't get out of. But what you're explaining right now, I say it all the time, but now you guys are hearing from a general officer who's saying the same thing. Due process is very hard to come by in the military, and be glad if you happen to get it and get a legitimate look at what is coming against you. Anyways.
And Sam, you could not have just described what's going on better than you just did. And here's the problem. There's no accountability for the people that flaunt the law, that flaunt these procedures. I can give you a great example. The investigator against me, a guy named Nolan Corpuz, Cropuz. He was not following the rules. He completely blew out of the water the timeline that he was supposed to follow. Number two, the law says that he has to investigate as the subject under investigation. He has to interview the witnesses that I put forward, because in my case, which is pretty normal, guess what they do? They only investigate the witnesses that are going to be friendly to the allegation that, by the way, not somebody else made. In my case, it was an allegation created by the investigator. So the accuser in my case was not some other individual. By the way, the individual that went after me is someone that should have known the law and should have known the rules. And under the current no more walking on eggshells policy, he would have been held accountable for filing 7 allegations against me, because he was in a position that he very well knew what the rules were. But back to the investigator. The investigator basically said, I'm not going to interview your witnesses because I think they're just character witnesses. Well, they weren't character witnesses. They were 25 individuals that were in the room when I was making the various decisions that they then later accused me of not trusting subordinates, etc. Here's the other piece that I know will get you fired up. Of those 25, at least almost half of them were enlisted personnel. My command chief, the other chiefs, all of the chief master sergeants that were in the different organizations, the first sergeants, the senior master sergeants, and oh, by the way, every single one of them supported me at the time and then after the fact. And that's exactly why they didn't interview them. Many of these guys were 40-year Guard guys. They were 65 years old. They had been in the Guard for 40 years. They were the most down-to-earth, salt-of-the-earth people that called a spade and knew what good leadership looked like, and they had my back from day one. I had to go out. My lawyers and me went out after the fact and got these war fighters, these American heroes, to document what they saw during the deployment and the decisions that I made and why I made them in the context. And we have that as evidence, but it is still not seen the light of day to this day, unfortunately.
Yeah, I want to throw some context in there for an audience that might not be familiar. If you're let's just say an officer, not a general officer, but if you're an officer at all, a senior ranking officer, but especially a general officer, and you're doing the wrong thing, even if you're not doing the wrong thing and you're just a crummy dude, you're not going to have a bunch of enlisted guys jumping up to go to bat for you. That's just not going to happen. The enlisted world, take this with a grain of salt. They don't hate officers, but there is a general divide and a bit of an animosity between the two components, because you have your workers and your guys who are in the dirt, and then you have the officers who are ordering them to be in the dirt. And so take that into consideration when he says all of these enlisted guys are coming to bat and speaking up for me because they were there, they witnessed it. If they had seen malfeasance,
Yeah.
I don't know these individuals, but being that there's no monetary gain for them or anything to achieve, I cannot imagine in a million years that they would have come to bat for you. So context there.
No, thank you, Sam. That is so true. I mean, I'm so thankful. The chief in charge of all the rescue forces, he said pretty much what you just described at the end of his letter. He said, if you gave General Sage a good reason why you thought a specific course of action made sense, and you gave him a good argument, General Sage would go to bat for you, and he would stand on a desk to fight for you, or to stand on a table to fight for you. So it's very blessed, and that's why when this first broke, sometimes you wonder, and maybe I'm going crazy here. And then you realize, okay, when these warriors who they had nothing to gain from this, to stand, like you said, to stand up for an officer, to stand up for a general, they put many of them put their careers on the line,
Sure.
and they wrote letters that went directly to the Undersecretary of the Air Force and up to the Department of War. And of course, we've heard nothing back, and we'll talk about that here in a minute.
Yeah. No, and it's important to point out too, and I want people to know why I'm talking to you because uh, I've seen these things before, and the last thing I'm going to do is, without knowing your situation in depth, without having been there, without having dug into all the materials, I'm not going to go to bat for a general officer, especially based on my track record and some of the general officers that I've attacked for the stuff that I have gone through and the evidence that I have had. What makes me so angry about your situation without knowing anything about it. And so take this from a guy, me, I have no ball in the fight. What is the term? I have no dog in the fight. Sorry.
Dog in a fight.
Yeah, there you go. I have no dog in the fight on this. What makes me so angry is, and you said it earlier, the BCMR, the Board of Corrections, reviewed all of the evidence. So these are people, they have nothing to do with you. They have nothing to do with anybody else. They're sitting there in a room. They are going through all of the evidence, and they said, yeah, no, this doesn't pass the smell test. And they overturned everything. And despite that, the Department of the Air Force and the Department of War said, nope, we're holding fast. And here is my speculation. You can either agree with this or just say nothing and just let me say it. There is an agenda, and people need to understand how the General Officer Corps works. General officers, and this is my description, you can either agree or disagree, but general officers are expected to do two things up front. First of all, protect the institution, protect that institution in which you serve, because you're wearing a star. You are now senior corporate management at the very tippy top. And second is protect the General Officer Corps. And we're going to get into this in a little bit, but you went against an established framework in I don't want to say agenda, but there was an order to do a thing, and you started asking questions about it, and you said, what is going on here? And you, as a general officer, committed the ultimate foul. You questioned things when you were supposed to toe the party line. You were supposed to get in step and make sure that your subordinates were doing what all the other generals were doing. And you said, hold up a minute, I've got some issues here. And right there, you condemned yourself. And that is my take. You condemned yourself, and the rest of the community said, nope, we can never trust General Chris Sage again because he didn't toe the party line. He didn't do what he was supposed to and get in step. And I have talked to so many leaders. And let me go off my tangent just a little bit longer. I need people to understand this, because we are going to get into the COVID conversation and where I think this all stems from. When there was a two-star general, and I'm going to get the names mixed up, but I don't want to put names in there anyways, but there was a two-star general in the Marine Corps. And his colonel came out and gave a story to a media outlet. But what he said, and he said he had permission from this two-star general to say this, but he said that, first of all, this two-star had been damaged. He had gotten some sort of heart damage from the vaccine. And when he was at there was a gathering of Marine Corps general officers, and his injury and what he had was known to General Berger at the time, who was the commandant of the Marine Corps. And he said that General Berger came up to him and verbatim said, "Keep your mouth shut. I don't want to cause, I'm forgetting the word here, but I don't want to cause issues with uptake on the vaccine in the Marine Corps. Keep your mouth shut." And ordered that two-star general who was a consummate warfighter. The guy had like 7 deployments under his belt. He was known as a Marine's Marine and all these other things. But he was ordered by the commandant to keep his mouth shut about this thing because he did not want him to cause hesitancy with Marines taking the vaccine. So let's get back to talking about this, but I want to start pushing into what I think and what I think you're getting to as far as why you were blacklisted in the Air Force.
Well, Sam, no, thank you for that. And here's the thing: it's my own ignorance to blame because I did not realize the game that I was supposed to be playing. So that's why, I grew up in the trenches, as you mentioned. You mentioned 7 combat deployments, exactly the number that I have. One of the highest number of combat hours, in the Air Force, which doesn't compare anything to the guys on the ground, but been there, done that as often as I could. So I didn't realize. I also come from an enlisted family. So I didn't realize sort of the unwritten rules that you so describe. But that's the other piece that is so sort of disheartening here. And you sort of alluded to it. So I'll sort of go back to the deployment and then we'll drive forward to the BCMR. During this deployment, every decision, as you knew at the time and everybody knew, there was so much rhetoric and so much sort of recommendations coming down the chain about COVID this and COVID that. So everything had to do with COVID. COVID was infused in almost every decision, unfortunately. But
Yes.
once again, we made a decision that we're going to do what's best for airmen and we are going to use common sense. And that's where I first went afoul. Why? Because in the IG report, as you might imagine, I got absolutely hammered for many decisions related to COVID. At the time, they were just the right decision to make. For example, we had 800 airmen that were swapping in, swapping out. And unbeknownst to me, the medical professionals, the medical quote experts on the base had set up a COVID test on the in processing line. Well, for those that remember this time, almost, I think, no, not almost, all of those airmen before they came over were tested before they got on the airplane. We had processes in place on the base where, first of all, our process is we had the lowest number of COVID cases in the entire AOR. We adopted policies like the following. I said, hey, they shut the gyms down. So when I showed up, the gyms were being shut down. And after I sort of figured out what was going on, I said, no, we're actually going to reopen the gyms because I'd rather have healthy airmen than sick airmen that are stuck in their tents with 8 airmen per tent. The second thing I did was I signed a direct order, along with actually a few of the other commanders in the AOR, that said, when our airmen are outside in the 110 degree heat, in the sun, underneath fighter aircraft that are loud, they're not going to wear a mask, because there was a period of time where we were told we had to even wear masks outside. So for occupational hazards, I said, no, we're not doing that. I pushed our doctors I was reading all the peer-reviewed evidence that was coming out at the time. So I was pushing for vitamin packs, vitamin D, et cetera. And the medical professionals scoffed at this, pushed back, went to the investigator and told them that I didn't trust them because I kept asking too many questions. And Sam, this next story is just
leaders don't ask questions. That's your career.
I was slow to pick up on the trend here. But it is summed up in the following. After one meeting where I was just asking questions like, hey, you're talking about masks, but I'm reading these peer-reviewed studies from Harvard, Brown, that basically say masks don't work. So why would we continue to wear masks? And one of the officers on my base that went after me in the IG report said to me, sir, you have to stop asking questions about COVID because you're coming across as being political. And I'll never forget that, because at that moment, it struck me that for me and my command chief, this was about common sense. For this officer and many of these medical professionals, this was me questioning their religion. I was questioning their ideology. I was questioning their religion. And I didn't pick up on the hint that if I didn't want to get in trouble, I better stop. So So sure enough, COVID was heavily involved in much of the sort of reports and testimony that went to the IG. So we can come back to it, but I just wanted to sort of jump ahead to the BCMR. When I
Yeah.
ultimately appealed to the BCMR, we had all of the reasons why this was an illegal investigation, a false investigation, the investigator failing to follow the procedures that are laid out in statutes, the Secretary of the Air Force failing to follow the statutes as I described earlier. But to the board's credit, and then perhaps unfortunately for me, they quickly latched on to all of the COVID aspects of my case. And without addressing all the other issues, which I wish they would have taken the time to address all of them, they said there is enough evidence, a preponderance of the evidence, that the actions taken against Brigadier General Sage by the IG and the resulting actions against him, removing him from the promotion list, et cetera, are due to his views and actions on COVID. And therefore, to what
There
you
you go.
mentioned earlier, they recommended that the IG case be thrown out, my record be expunged, I get put back the process to put me back on the 2-star list, and I'd be extended on active duty. So they teed up the win for the current administration and the current leaders in the Air Force. And for some unknown reason that we still don't know to this day, a brand new political appointee, I think we know why, but a brand new political appointee overturned the board results, which just makes absolutely no sense. My attorney has been a part of David Yance. Many of your listeners will know him.
Yeah.
He's been a part of over 200 of these cases. He's only seen the board overturn, it's either 2 or 4 of these cases. And in all 100% of those overturns, they were in favor of the person who's appealing, not against him. So it makes no sense why they did this. However, it actually makes total sense. And we'll talk about the obstructionists that are still infiltrating the highest levels of the Department of War here in a few minutes.
Yeah, it makes total sense to me, and I've seen enough of this, and I'll tell you, for all the people out there that hit me up all the time and say, Sam, why has no one stood up? Where are all the general officers at? Where are all of the high ranking people speaking out about this? Mostly in reference to COVID, but any number of issues. Take note. If you don't toe the party line, and there is a party line based on not just the administration you're in, but based on what has been allowed to fester and grow over, I take this back to 2012, but we started to see this ideological purge circa 2012. Some people take it a little bit further back than that. We can have that argument back and forth and talk about where it really started. But I see that point in time where Obama shifted from war fighters excelling, being promoted based on their leadership and their acumen in combat, because we were in the middle of the global war on terror, to an ideological push to carry water for an agenda that we've seen that really got legs under it in the last administration, with all of the DEI and the socialist Marxist ideology that really just took off in the military, and that we are still combating to this day. So understand, and I'll get off my soapbox here, but understand that you have leaders like this that question things. Hey, common sense. You heard what he said, and those things were speaking against a religion, a literal religion. Why have these people been so hard line and not addressing evidence as it comes forth in peer-reviewed journals and in everywhere else that we have seen actual researched evidence? I'm not talking about social media. I'm not talking about your mom's Facebook where she read such and such. I'm talking about peer-reviewed journals where they have seen the evidence for these things, and yet still they have obfuscated and pushed away and said, no, this is what we're doing, and anybody who speaks against that gets smashed. All right, I'm done. But
Sam, this one will, your blood pressure's up a little bit. This one will elevate it slightly more. Even though it wasn't in the IG report, it's the actual point that my command chief and I believe that these people just, started to sort of plot the coup against us. My first week that I was there, I heard that, hey, we have a tent where some of the airmen are sick with COVID, so they were isolating them. I said, okay, great. I want to go meet these airmen. They're like, well, sir, that's not a good idea because, they're sick and you're not. I'm like, well, I said, but if COVID's not that big a deal and they've had the shot, they shouldn't be able to give it to me, correct? So they asked me to put on gloves. They, put on all the protective gear. Okay. So I go into the tent and I take the gloves off. I shake their hands. I figured I can wash my hands later. And the doctors were freaking out. But when I walked in that tent, Sam, and then when I left the tent, this will shock you. They had put the tent inside barbed wire. So when I asked, why is the tent inside barbed wire? They're like, well, sir, they're COVID patients and we have to keep people out and we need to keep them in. And I said, this is insane. I said, in a very polite way, by the way, respectable way, I gave an order. I said, we're going to rip down that barbed wire tomorrow or tonight. So that right there is when they turned against me and I, continued to ask the other questions. So I tore down the barbed wire. I told them, hey, these guys are sick. They're not, they're patients. They're not prisoners. And my command chief, I give him the credit. We decided a day later that when we got our numbers low enough, that we had enough DV quarters, because, we're living in austere conditions. We walk to the bathroom. When we had enough airmen, few enough airmen combined, matched against our DV quarters, we put every single one of them in the DV quarters so they could actually recover with dignity, with indoor plumbing. So that's the kind of decisions that we made. We went from barbed wire to putting our young, sick airmen in DV quarters because they're sitting empty, and it made sense.
Sure.
But that just, it literally, I think, just pissed people off that we were questioning the narrative. And like I say, it all makes sense to me now. When you read this report, Sam, it is 100% what you described. It reads as the oppressed versus the oppressor. Some of the people complaining about me were 2 levels down. There was a commander in between me and them. It was never about anything I did to them. It was just about, well, I'm not sure. I said this and the general made a different decision. Normal sort of good order and discipline, command decisions that are being made real time in combat. But the investigator would never know because he did the entire investigation as a GS civilian from his air-conditioned office in the Pentagon. Never came and visited, did the entire thing over the email and over the phone. So, it doesn't surprise me that he could write his narrative the way he did.
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier, but for point of reference, the Secretary of War Hegseth, he put out a policy called, it's the slang term, it's not the official term, but it's the no walking on eggshells policy. And
Right.
and what that was meant to do was it was meant to prevent people from weaponizing IG and the legal system, if you will, against commanders who are just doing the right thing. And not to prevent people from reporting actual violations of regulations or the law, but people weaponizing the IG and then basically when you report somebody, it locks them in a process of suspension. And I'm not sure how it worked for you as a general officer, but usually at lower levels, once you get reported and they open an investigation on you, at that point, you're suspended while you're being investigated. So you're completely sidelined. So we've seen this for years and years and years. In fact, I worked with a commander in the Army not too long ago, and she described exactly what you just said. First of all, her entire company, minus those people who complained and made those allegations, came out and gave not only character statements, but evidence of what actually took place. The entire enlisted body of her organization came forward and gave sworn statements. And guess what? They ignored every single one in the investigation because they were not conducive to the allegations that were made against her. And I could go into more of that. That's not what we're talking about today. But what I'm saying is this policy, the no walking on eggshell policies, was put in place specifically because the weaponization of our inspector general is out of control. And I have talked to probably a dozen colonels coming out of Leavenworth, out of training there, who talk about what they've seen and how they're turning down command positions because they said it's not worth their career. They'd rather retire as an 05 than take their chance as an '06, potentially pick up brigade command, and then have something lodged against them that ruins their career. So it's not worth it. I'm good retiring as an '05. And so we have people leaving the military because they just don't want to deal with the hassle of somebody lodging a false complaint against them, because it is really that detrimental and ruinous of their career.
Yeah, Sam, the only, you're right. And sometimes in the past, the command chain has also been the one, and maybe in the case of her situation, they're the ones that are sort of weaponizing the system. I'm very blessed that in my situation, first of all, my commander at the time, who now, by the way, is the Northcom commander, the normal thing to do is to remove that individual from command if there's supposedly smoke. Well,
Mm-hmm.
he quickly launched his own informal investigation. He came and visited. He ramped up the number of visits to my base, like tripled them, which was fine. I was happy to have him come. He sent his senior enlisted leadership. He sent his 2 stars, 1 star, and about 8 colonels. So we were being looked at by with a microscope over the next couple of months. He made a decision to not remove me from command because he told me later, my call sign's Forrest. He said, Chris, no smoke, no fire, just keep doing a good job. I got your back. So during that year of command, he did have my back. I'm also very fortunate that when I left the command, in months later, the report came out to my next chain of command. That chain of command, a 3-star warrior, combat fighter pilot, and his 4-star boss looked at all the evidence, and they had access to all the interviews, all the evidence, and they said my actions were appropriate. And they didn't even, the pressure on them, Sam, would have been to give me a slap on the wrist, verbal counseling, something. They refused and they took no action against me and put that on paper. And I'm very blessed to have had great leadership backing me up the entire time. I'm being yanked through this knothole for 4 years. My chain of command also did a really good job of taking care of my family, allowing us to stay in place. So I have no problem with that. In my case, the situation was definitely on the civilian side. It is so bad, Sam. So the no more walking on eggshells policy is fantastic. The 7 May memo that came out of Mr. Tata's office that said, hey, we're going to look at all these old cases. We're going to bring justice to the injustices that were done over the last 4 years related to COVID, which is how I ended up winning at the BCMR. That's great news. But what people don't realize, and maybe some of them, your audience is smart enough to realize, all of the advisors around these people are the same exact people that were persecuting people like me and others over the last 4 years. For example, in the Air Force, the acting general counsel, a woman named Shannon McGuire, was in the system, in the GC office for the last couple of years. One of her deputies, Julia Mudeking, Muedeking, she is now in the position where she's the one reviewing my case and advising against me on the BCMR, yet she was also the one advising the leadership under the last administration to persecute me. So you're screwed one way and you're screwed the other way is the bottom line. And what I don't understand is why our senior leaders do not realize, and maybe they do, but they allow this to continue. They allow the obstructionist at the 2nd and 3rd tier levels to remain. I mean, I call it the Pentagon deck furniture. They literally just shuffle the deck furniture around, but it never gets thrown overboard. I mean, they did fire the senior JAGs in all 3 services, which apparently needed to happen, but no one below that, specifically on the civilian side. On the general counsel side, these are the same obstructionists. I think philosophically, we have nothing in common with them. They don't know what combat is like. They don't know what common sense looks like. We have very different views on the Constitution, in the way that this structure is supposed to be set up. And one final point, even though he didn't have the guts to put it in the IG report, I know for a fact that people were diming me out for the following. When I got there within the first month, we ordered pocket constitutions. And when every single new airman came in for the next year, I gave them a copy of the Constitution of the United States. And here's what I asked them. I started, it maybe doesn't surprise you, but it's something we need to work on in the military. The average response I got was when I asked, how many of you have ever read this document when they found it on their seat? it was about 20%, and I did it in a
I'm
very
shocked
sort
that
of
it was that high of a number.
non-accusatory way. And I said, hey, but I said, I'm with you. I said, I hadn't read it until a couple years ago, but we all need to read this document. We got to improve the civics in our military. And they appreciated that. Most of them appreciated that, except I know that the naysayers, the same people that went after me, they somehow saw that as being political,
Mhm.
and that I was wasting time talking about these old documents. It's so sad, but those are the kind of people that had sway under, over the last couple of years. And unfortunately, a lot of them are still embedded inside the Department of War.
Yeah, what you're talking about is not a singular viewpoint. Uh, People, once again, if you followed me, you've seen me put this stuff out, and you've seen the evidence I've showed you of this. But the Constitution itself is a flashpoint for these radical leftists to attack and to undermine, and it has crept so vociferously into the military that it is being attacked at all levels. Now, you'll never hear a general officer say anything about it. And I love to tell this story. My buddy was in a room. He was a company commander at the time. He was a Mustang prior enlisted, infantry battalion. So a room full of company commanders, and the brigade commander, 06 type, verbatim, and I've memorized this over the years because I love to tell this story, told those captains, he said, references to the Constitution are a dog whistle for white supremacy. That is an 06 colonel who is on the verge of being your rank, a brigadier general, and he made that comment to a room full of impressionable young captains. My friend was not a young captain. Like I said, he was a Mustang, but still, you have all of these junior officers who are up and coming. They are leading troops. They're actually training troops because it was a training battalion. It was in infantry basic training. And an 06 colonel is saying this, and I have heard this over and over and over from elements, from lieutenants to majors, just all these pockets across the military questioning and saying, well, that's an outdated document, this and that. And what you don't understand is that in and of itself is political. What's not political is reinforcing the Constitution that we literally swear an oath to.
Amen.
Everybody understand, the officers do not swear an oath to anything else other than the
Amen.
Constitution. Enlisted swear an oath to obey the orders of the officers appointed over them, but officers do not swear an oath to anyone. It is only to the Constitution of the United States and nothing else. And by questioning that document, you are questioning your own oath, and you should not be in a uniform. You should not be anywhere in any institution in this nation if you question the Constitution. By all means, get out and have your little Starbucks circles and bang your drum and have all the discussions you want. But while you are in uniform, you will defend and support that document, because that is the only reason you have a job. The only reason. So, man, it's crazy.
And Sam, I assume these were this was the common understanding decades ago. And you're right, somewhere in the last couple of decades, it was lost, and we maybe, we got to put the focus back in that area, because you're 100% spot on.
Aggressively. And I'll say thank you. Don't mean to sound butt kissish here, but thank you for actually doing that, because we have been leading an effort to get the services to take this seriously and to institute constitutional training. If we can do sexual harassment training, and we can do cyber warfare training, and we can do fake SEER training online. I don't even know what that's all about, why you would do SEER training on a computer. That's just the dumbest thing I've ever heard of, but we do it nonetheless. And we commit dozens of hours to this every year. And yet I cannot remember one time in 21 years of service where I had any kind of constitutional training or any check on learning where I had to ask questions about the very thing I am sworn to defend and protect. Not once in 21 years.
Not once in 31 years. Not once in 31 years, Sam.
That's appalling. And I don't know what it takes to get that changed. I don't know why it's such a radical concept to get. We don't teach it in schools anymore. I find I'm very surprised when I find a high school that actually does civics anymore. By and large, we don't teach civics in school. People are unaware of what the Constitution says or does. We have these things pinging at us from TikTok and Instagram and wherever else you get your social media saying, "Oh, it's just that was a bunch of racist people back then who did racist things and they had slaves and all this." And so we feed this into the psyche of our youth, and then we expect them to just magically turn that off, come into the military, and support and defend this thing that they've heard for years is this racist manifest. And it doesn't work like that. I don't know why. Uh, Anyways, we're not here for me. We're here for you. So I want to get back to I want to talk about what you have personally witnessed as far as and you're talking about it. You're talking about these elements, these second and third tier elements that just get shuffled around. And this is one of the things that I've complained about the most. They are not firing the people who have put these policies in place. In fact, one of the people that I did a huge expose on is now the public or the senior policy SES at the Pentagon, who was also in charge of creating the policy for DEI and the COVID policies and everything else. And yet she is leading the policy effort, which part of that is reinstituting service members back into uniform who were unlawfully discharged. The Secretary of Defense, Secretary of War himself, Hegseth, said it was implemented unlawfully. Implemented, not the order itself. The order itself was a lawful order. It was implemented unlawfully the way it was done. Therefore, your discharge was unlawful in nature, and we are going to bring you back. Trump said, executive order, we are going to bring you back. And yet we have seen anything but. I think the last number I saw, which I don't even necessarily believe it's true, but was close to 200 people. 200 people in a year with all of the people that I personally know who wanted to come back in and who have said, I quit. I quit.
Yeah.
And the ones who did try to come back in said that it was like an 8-month grueling process, jumping through hoops, having conversations with heads of HRC and recruiters not knowing what to do and nobody knowing what the process is. And I'm like, do we not bring service members back into uniform every single day in the hundreds and the thousands? How is this so hard to do? The reason is what you described. Those second and third tier elements are blocking that. So what is your take on that? And what have you seen personally?
Yeah, I think, you've heard the term malicious compliance, and I think
Mm,
we have some of the same mutual friends that the stories they tell are just appalling. The driving a few hours to go, through medical and medical tests to try to come back in, being grouped with, brand new recruits, treated like you're, a 18-year-old recruit. I mean, just the stories are very, very unfortunate. I mean, my take on it, of course, I'm not a policymaker in this area, but I mean, they should have just done a blanket reinstatement. You're all just magically reinstated and then adjudicate each and every one of them. If there was some reason why they shouldn't come back in for medical or whatever, then, then retire them or help them find alternative employment, which happens many times when people are separated, depending on the reason that they're separated. So, yes, it's very unfortunate. I've heard similar numbers. I heard someone right before Christmas say that they thought the number was around 90 people had been reinstated. Whether it's 90 or 200, that is just very, very sad when you know that the number is about 8,000 that were forced out, and then another 70 to 80,000 that were either coerced or stepped away before they got hammered.
right.
So yeah, I think, the other sad piece of this story is my understanding is the deadline to put in for reinstatement is coming up over the next couple of months here. And that's why, as David Yantz, my attorney, points out, that's why my case is like, say, it's less about me, more about everybody else, because I'm the canary in the coal mine. Because in the Air Force anyway, if you want to come back in and you want to get this overturned, you have to go through almost everyone has to go through the BCMR process. Now,
Mm,
it's supposed to be quick. They're supposed to use the same memo that I talked about earlier that they ruled in my favor on, to quickly overturn cases for the people that were kicked out. But I'm hearing from scores of them who are like, General, why would I put myself through what you just went through? And I'm very sympathetic for them. Now, I've encouraged them to keep fighting the good fight. One of the questions I get asked quite often is, why am I doing this? Well, I'm very blessed. 31 and a half years coming from an enlisted family. I made it way further than I thought I would make it. And that's fine. But the one reason why we decided to fight this was we knew it was wrong. My command chain at the time said, you got to fight this. This is not about us. This is about the politicians in DC
Hmm.
or the political appointees under the last administration. Like, you have to keep fighting. The enlisted force encouraged me to keep fighting, and my wife, encouraged me to keep fighting. But why did I do it? It's been very painful, extremely painful. And oh, by the way, the second that you get that black mark against you and you're, quote, under investigation, they know this. This is how administrative lawfare works. You then, you do your day job, by the way, downrange, doing my day job, flying combat sorties, shooting down drones, leading our airmen from the front. And then I would spend every free minute at night working on my defense.
Uh-huh.
And they know that. They know that they're going to make life painful for you. But I'm very thankful. I had a supportive network, as I just described. We have the resources. I mean, I'm very blessed. We've been able to save, and obviously my paycheck is a lot higher than most people's. So we're gonna spend the money to fight this. And even a year ago, people are like, hey, maybe you should move on. I'm like, I am fighting this to the last possible day. And it's fitting in so many ways, especially when this eventually gets overturned. But when you get put into the leper colony, which is what happens the second you get that black mark against you. So for me, the last 4 years, everybody stops talking to you. The system stops talking to you. They
Hmm.
stop putting you in for all the, for the training that you were getting before to go to the next level. And that's all fine. I can handle all that. But what's fitting is that near the end, my attorney, we put in for an extension based on what the BCMR recommended, even though it was overturned. We're like, hey, we need more time to adjudicate my case. So we just put in for a couple-month extension. The last email on active duty that I received was from one of these lawyers, a government lawyer who had been fighting me for the last 4 years, who said, the Secretary of the Air Force would like to thank you for your service. So
Oh,
the last communication
nasty.
I get is from a government lawyer, which is kind of appropriate, but the fight's not over. We'll continue to fight this for my, not just to clear my name, but also for all of these other warfighters that have the fight still in front of them.
Well, and I want to address those, which I guarantee there's plenty out there because I've dealt with them. I've been on social media long enough. I want to address those people who say, oh, boo hoo, oh 07 retires. What does he have to worry about? This is what happened to me. And I ask you, I say, when is injustice okay? What is the measure for injustice? Is it because this person was put to death and so they have the worst of it? And this person was unduly, accused and their career was taken away from them and they had to jump through years of lawfare and this grueling administrative process. Okay, yeah, I would rather be that guy than the guy who was put to death for an injustice. But does that change the fact that it's still injustice? Does it change the fact that something was done to somebody that has torn the fabric of our DNA and that thing we strive for as human beings, which is a just world, a just society, for fairness to be the to be doled out in all situations. So I got it. You want to say something ridiculous about an '07 who retired, but it pisses me off when I see this because I'm like, it's still unjust. And at what point do we allow it? What is the metric for that? So
Yeah.
I
Now,
have
Sam, now you're right, Sam, and I definitely don't, I definitely don't request any sympathy. I mean, my only defense would be if you look at if you Google my bio, my Air Force bio, I mean, you'll see that I was in the trenches the whole time, and people know that I was not a creature of the swamp. I was not a company man. I worked my way up in the combat arms side of the U.S. Air Force, and oh, by the way, they went after me shortly after I pinned on my first star, and I was overseas anyway, so I was definitely not in the sort of the inner circle by any means. So that's fine. But yeah, we have to fight. We have to stand up. We have to push back Here's an important point, Sam. You talk about due process and justice. The board was set up specifically. It's the same structure. The BCMR has been around, but they were given guidance that they were going to expedite these cases. And I was one of the first, if not the first, into the system. They took 1.5 to 2 months to look at every shred of evidence, even evidence that I don't have, because we FOIA'd everything about my case, the emails, and we've received, of the 8, we've only received 3. Of course, they were heavily redacted, so we still have 5 that are outstanding. Some of those 5 were first filed in July of 2023. So we just hit the 30-month point with no, they're supposed to get you information from the FOIA in 20 months.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, 20 business days.
Yeah.
And we're now at 40 months.
We're going to address this very soon. I have a guy coming on, and I was telling you a little bit about this, but we have a real FOIA issue in the military.
Oh,
and trust me, we are going to break that open because there are criminal things being done.
absolutely. I mean, they just blatantly, they flaunt the law. I mean, they write you a letter saying, "Oh, we're so busy, we'll get to it when we get to it," and they just ignore the law, and no one has held these bureaucrats accountable, unfortunately. But one other quick point on this BCMR: 2 months of looking at every shred of evidence. A brand new political appointee comes in, and 6 days after the results came out, recommending everything be overturned, etc. 6 days, 4 business days, 2 days on the weekend, he overturns it. And with a letter, he had only been in the job for a couple of weeks, with a letter that was obviously written by the lawyers. So here's what happened. These same attorneys that I just mentioned, they were waiting for the BCMR results to come out, because they found out that they were going to finally set me free. The second that the BCMR results came out, they quickly give the package to this new political appointee that says, "Sir, you got to overturn this." They wrote the letter. They gave him a giant stack of documents. I used to work in the Pentagon. I know how this works. A giant stack of documents, and said, "Sir, sign here." And it is so clear to anybody that understands the system how they continued to execute the lawfare even to the last second.
I believe that is exactly what happened without knowing, just because I've seen it happen so many
Oh, yeah.
times. Yep.
Same.
You're man. Well, um, you got anything else to add to that? That was a lot.
Sam, once again, I've been very, very blessed. We have a wonderful military. My family, my wife, myself, we dedicated, just like you did, we dedicated our adult life to this nation,
Mm.
to defending our Constitution. There are so many wonderful people in our military. It's the kind of people that I wanted to be around, that I still wanted to be around, because it's the best of the best that are willing to send their sons and daughters, and then those that raise their right hand to defend the Constitution. They're the best of the best. They're the 1%, the less than 1%, that are willing not only to fight, but are willing to give their life. So it was an honor to serve. We'll continue to fight for those that are left behind. It's not over. We're going to continue to appeal this once again with the resources that we've been blessed with. There's some great people out there that want to continue to fight, not just my case, but all these cases. So we'll see where this goes. But I appreciate you continuing to fight the good fight and raising this issue with your audience, because it's worth it. Our nation is worth it. The future of our nation is worth it for our kids and our grandkids.
Absolutely. Well, we'll leave it at that. General Chris Sage, go check him out. Thank you, sir, for being on the show. We're going to have this conversation a lot more, and I hope people dig into your story and find out what's going on, because the military is the lifeblood and the first and last defense of this nation against enemies, foreign and domestic. And we have to preserve that. There is an element that is trying to destroy and sabotage and cripple that organization. And we have to recognize it, expose it, and fight back against it. So thank you, sir. Thank you for coming on and telling your story. And God bless.
God bless you, Sam. Thank you.